Okay, good morning. Good to see everyone again. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Southern Nevada Strategic Infrastructure Development Working Group at about 10:02 today, April 29th. Jeanette, would you like to establish quorum?
Yes, of course. This is Jeanette Holguin, and I will now call the roll. Chris Sanchez.
Here.
Doa Ross.
Here.
Okay. Jeff Brigger.
Here.
Justin Brown.
Here.
Terry Sheridan. Terry Sheridan. I did see you on here. I'll circle back to you. I think you're having a couple audio issues. Bill Arndt.
Here.
Okay. Thank you. Rafi Festakajan.
Here.
Maisha Williams.
Present.
Thank you. Shani Coleman.
Here.
Betsy Fretwell. All right. James Chrisley.
Here.
Thank you. Bo Bernard.
Here.
Thank you. Victor Way. Okay. Derek Hill.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Victor Way is here.
Oh, hi, Victor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Derek Hill. Okay. MJ Maynard. I do see you on here. Maybe you're having a mic issue. Let me come back to you, okay? David Swallow. David Bobzian.
Here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jennifer Taylor.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Federico Saragoza.
I'm here.
Thank you. Christina Swallow.
Here.
Okay. Sandra Rosenberg. Okay. All right. Bradley Crawwell. Okay. Jim Lawrence. Oh,
Here.
okay. Kristen Averett.
Here.
Thank you. Constant Brooks.
Good morning. Here.
Dr. Kamadacharya.
Here.
Thank you. Bart Patterson.
Present.
Okay. All right, and let me just circle back really quickly for Miss Betsy Fretwell.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Derek Hill. Okay. MJ Maynard, I think you had some mic issues. I see you on here. I'll mark you. All right. David Swallow. Okay. Sandra Rosenberg. And Bradley Crowell. All right. I will mark Derek Armstrong, Chancellor Melody Rose, Sean Sever, Derek Hill, David, oh, one second. David Swallow, and as absent, Chris, we have quorum.
Thank you, Jeanette. Appreciate that. Moving on to item 2, public comment. Jeanette, would you like to facilitate public comment?
Yes. Does anyone wish to give public comment at this time? Please state your name clearly and you will be limited to 3 minutes. Okay, and we didn't receive any written public comment either. So Chris, no public comment at this time.
Thanks, Jeanette. So moving on to item 3, approval of the March 18th, 2021 minutes. Were there any edits to the minutes? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the March 18th meeting?
So moved.
So moved.
All right. You have a second?
I'll second.
Bart.
All right. Thank you. So all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, my remarks. Give me a second here. I got to get the screen situated. Well, again, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for attending our third iteration of this meeting, and just want to reiterate how important this is to GOED as we move forward and looking to advance the recommendations that SRI had made to our agency with respect to recovery and resilience, and looking at how Nevada and how our regions can thrive and be successful in the year 18 months and beyond. One of the things that was called out to GOED through the report was the development of ecosystems that enable entrepreneurialism and will support small businesses and start to target technology-based firms to come and invest in Nevada. And I get really excited when I talk about, autonomy and electrification and the potential there. And I know that many of you in your respective jurisdictions that you're responsible for in your agencies have been working on these areas for quite some time and truly are experts in our state and understanding how the technologies work and the vast potential that we have. And when I think about Southern Nevada and I think about that opportunity, with the federal push and I'm sure many of you may have caught the president's speech last night in which he announced the investment in infrastructure and investment in jobs and what I think he said was the largest investments in 4 decades. We really have an opportunity here in Southern Nevada in these areas, and GOED is focused on the supply chain side of let's say lithium and battery production. We feel we've got a great opportunity to advance that entire ecosystem in our state, and as part of that, it's the testing and adoption and deployment of those technologies as well. And so as we look to grow this region and diversify, and as we look to grow our state and diversify, these 2 areas are ones that we think we have an inherent advantage. Of course, we've got some work to do in the top line strategy and making sure that we have, infrastructure defined broadly in place to support, 5G, Internet of Things, the ability for devices and vehicles to communicate with one another, and infrastructure. And then, of course, on the electrification side, making sure that we have the proper infrastructure in place for those adoption and deployment of those vehicles. It's interesting as we were preparing for this discussion today, McKinsey, as they often are quite timely with their research, and they had put out on April 6th a mobility study, mobility and electrification study. And there were a couple of points in that I think are worth mentioning today as we kind of tackle these topics and think about them. And that is that electrification and mobility and automotive software are going to be growing by 250% by 2030, which just is kind of a staggering thing to think about. It's such a big number, 250% growth in the next 8 years. They also concluded that the mobility industry will double in size by 2030. So this represents a huge opportunity for Southern Nevada. And ancillary to that, which is important for us to consider as well, is that software and electronics firms are going to be growing rapidly. And this has a huge impact on our workforce. And as we start to think about transitioning folks into new fields, and we start to stand up training and workforce programs, being mindful of the fact that these industries are growing and advancing so rapidly now, much more than we've seen in the last decade, in fact. The decisions that we are making now are really going to position us for where we end up in the next 8 years at the end of that pipeline. And so as we've put together the agenda for today's discussion, we wanted to focus on trying to get an understanding of both what's going on in the macro region in the Southwest, in these areas, where Nevada currently sits from the perspective of industry, and where those gaps are in our ecosystem. Where are those opportunities that we ought to be looking at as we advance these technologies, and more importantly, seek to lead in these areas? And we all work together very closely. I think everybody on the in the working group and and perhaps listening in. But we've got development occurring all across our valley, and a lot of interest in firms to come to Nevada. And so understanding how we carve out this opportunity for ourselves and really seize it at this moment, and are thoughtful in looking at the drawdown of federal funds that will help us advance these areas, I think is extremely important. So again, I just want to reiterate that we're really appreciative of all of your time. We know that everybody's busy, and carving an hour and a half out once a month to have this conversation. And the working group participation is extremely important to us. And so one of the things that we've done with this panel, and I'll when we move on to the next agenda item, I'll be introducing them, is we've asked the panelists to not provide PowerPoint presentations. We're going to dive right into a series of questions after some real quick introductions. And I encourage all of the working group members to, if you think of a question, please jump in. We want to keep this segment kind of informal in that regard, and have your participation as well. So, so with that, I'll move on to item number 5, which is our panel discussion, which we've titled Trends in Electrification and Autonomous Systems and How Southern Nevada Can Lead in the Adoption and Deployment of Such Technologies. So what I'll do is I'll call out each of our panelists and have them do a brief introduction. And then with we have 3 of them today. And once we have the 3rd introduction, we'll move into a couple of our questions here, and then certainly we'd love to hear from the group as we progress through the discussion. So Mike Blank, who's a regional policy lead at Neuro, would you like to say a few remarks?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Mike Blank, and I am the regional policy lead for Neuro. Neuro exists to better everyday life through robotics. Our custom electric autonomous vehicles are designed to bring the things you need, from produce to prescriptions, right to your home. We have a fleet of on-road, fully occupantless and autonomous vehicles that are designed to deliver everyday goods ranging from your groceries and pizza and prescriptions in a way that's quick, affordable, and importantly safe. We currently have existing partnerships with companies like Kroger, Domino's Pizza, CVS, and other leading companies. We're really focused on helping connect people with the brick and mortar retail stores in their community. Today, we've launched driverless operations in 3 states, Arizona, California, and Texas. And are currently delivering in Houston today groceries with Kroger and prescriptions with CVS, as well as just recently announced delivery with Domino's Pizza in Houston as well. And so thank you for having me, and interested in the discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. We'll move on to Nalani Derrickson, who's Public Policy and Business Development at Tesla.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be on the call with you all today. Thanks, GoEd, for inviting me to this working group. So this is Nalani Derrickson. I'm on the Business Development and Policy team at Tesla. I focus primarily on charging infrastructure in the Western US states. So I work a lot with cities, states, local jurisdictions on programs and policies that advance transportation electrification. Taking a little bit of a step back, Tesla's mission, big picture, is to lead the world's sustainable energy future. So that's from the way we generate electricity, our solar, to the way we store electricity through storage, to the way we use electricity in our vehicles. Nevada is a huge market for us, a big state. We have a great footprint there. And we're seeing a lot of growth on the vehicle side. Right now, we have about 10,000 Tesla vehicles in state to date, and that's growing quickly. And we've had to double our fast charging network to continue to keep up. Happy to dig more into that as we go through the panel. I will say, I support our charging electric vehicle team, not our AV efforts. So I'll defer those questions to my esteemed other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Nolani. And next we have Samuel Wimpe, Director of Government Relations and Public Policy at Motional.
Morning, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to discuss these important topics with you today. I think the willingness to embrace the future of transportation, as evidenced by forums just like this, show why Nevada continues to be a leader in autonomous technology development. Just a little bit of background about Motional. We're a 50-50 joint venture between Hyundai and Aptiv. We're focused on level 4 autonomous robotaxis. Basically, these would be autonomous vehicles that you could hail on a traditional ride-hailing network. We have a testing footprint in Boston, Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, and Singapore. And then we also have R&D offices in Seoul and Santa Monica as well. The organization has had a presence in Nevada since 2018 when we opened a technical center. Then it was part of Aptiv, although that whole part of the business, as I mentioned, is now part of the joint venture. That office, the technical center, is focused on research and development, but what sets it apart, I think, from many of our other research and development facilities is that a key value that it's looking to unlock is how do you have autonomous vehicle operations at scale. So that's the technology and the software and the hardware that goes into it, but also all of the people that go into supporting a larger fleet, vehicle maintenance at scale, sensor calibration, all those things like that. How do you make sure like a whole fleet of vehicles is charged up and ready to go before they go out and are on the network? Later on in 2018, we also partnered with Lyft, and we've put autonomous vehicles on their network as part of a pilot. To date, we've given over 100,000 paid rides to members of the public in our autonomous vehicles in Las Vegas, and 98% of them have given it a 5-star rating. We think this is an amazing way for the public and locals in Nevada, as well as visitors, to experience the future of technology right in Las Vegas. In the state of Nevada, we operate 3 different vehicle platforms. We use some BMW 5 Series on the Lyft network. We're also doing some fully driverless testing on the public streets of Las Vegas with some Pacificas. And then we have recently started migrating everything over onto a wholly electric Hyundai platform known as the Ioniq 5, which was just announced, I believe, a month or 2 ago. And I think those will be commercially available to consumers later this year. Infrastructure plays a huge role in our operations. Obviously, the quality of the roads, signage, things like that make a big difference, but also the hard infrastructure around pickup and drop-offs, how those are designed, complete streets, how pedestrians are protected, all those different things are the things we think about when it comes to infrastructure. There's also the digital infrastructure, everything from smart signals to digitized road rules, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the panel. But I will note before we get too far into this that at least I can't speak for our other panelists, but our vehicles are designed to operate with the cities of today. And as more smart infrastructure is built up, that will make things more efficient and easier and smoother. But we don't require a lot of the extra like smart sensors to be able to operate safely. It will just make it, we'll be able to bring more vehicles out at a larger scale the more of that we have. I'll also just close by saying that we are taking the position kind of we're going to be taking, and you'll see in my answers this morning, is that the ideas we'll be putting forward should be benefiting all of Nevadans, whether they are in an AV or another user of the road. Many of these suggestions are going to start improving road safety before commercial autonomous vehicles are at scale and everywhere. So these are going to be things that will start to benefit individuals that are already using ride hailing, other individuals on the road, pedestrians, things like that. So and making sure that these are not things that will purely benefit the use case of autonomous ride sharing, but everyone on the road. So thank you again for this opportunity. Looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you for your introductions. Oh, sorry, was there? Sorry, we had some feedback there. Samuel, you hit on I think kind of where our first question was centered, which is, I'd mentioned to the panelists prior to the working group that we have individuals representing our utilities as well as our cities and our county and our state transportation department. So I'd like to hear from each of you kind of around on the more specifically on the infrastructure development side. What are you seeing in terms of regions and states, and where, if there were any pressure points or pain points in the development of the technologies and deployment? If you can give us a little bit of perspective. I think, Samuel, you started to kind of go down that road a little bit. You want to expand on that, and it'd be great to hear from Nolani as well about the electrification side, and Mike. So You want to lead off on that?
Sure.
Steve?
Yeah, I think when it comes to hard infrastructure of the streets, I think a pain point in an area that we spend a lot of attention on is what we call pickup and drop off, or PUDO is maybe the industry shorthand for it. And again, you will not have had to have ridden in an autonomous vehicle to have experienced this. Anyone who has spent any time at an airport in the last, I don't know, 10 years has seen how much the experience there has changed with ride hailing coming in, and how congested some of the drop off areas are, and how the entire parking center has had to be reconfigured at different, not just McCarran, but many airports in order to accommodate the different types of modes that people are now arriving to the airport in. And there, airports are a little bit of a leader when it comes to that, and you'll start to see it at casinos as well, with how they're managing the huge influx of traffic through ride hail. And so that is a particular pain point. Or maybe not a pain point is the right way to say it, but in an area where we think that some updates to infrastructure or changes or investment could make the use case quite a bit more efficient. Larger, more flexible areas for pickup and drop off, rather than shoehorning it into small valet places that may currently exist. What this looks like is much larger, more flexible holding areas for vehicles to come in, and for people to then find their ride. And again, this is something that would start to benefit a lot of locations well ahead of autonomous vehicles, with how often individuals are using ride hail. So that's maybe on like a larger scale, what it would look like in big convention centers or airports or casinos. But if you think it even to a smaller scale, just the side of a road, I think we've all experienced times when you're maybe trying to find parking, or you're even driving on a relatively less trafficked commercial street where there's vehicles just parked. Maybe it's a ride hail driver waiting for their passenger, or someone going out to quick grab something for takeout. They're just, the road network is not yet situated for kind of these on-demand services. And so even just having the curb be more flexible, perhaps throughout times of day for how it is used, maybe in the mornings it's commercial delivery, it shifts to paid parking throughout certain times of the day, and then again shifts to more flexible uses like pickup and drop off later on. And so that's a particular piece where some smart metering, smart curb spaces could really play a huge role in the deployment of autonomous vehicles. But again, you start to see some benefit much earlier with on-demand delivery and transportation and things like that.
Great. Melanie, did you want to weigh in on that in terms of the electrification side?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe taking a small step back. So for electric vehicles, there are 3 major types of charging. And sorry if you guys already know this, not to lady explain to you, but I think it's always helpful to level set. So you have level 1 charging, and that's on a 120 volt outlet, and that's similar to charging your toaster. And it can take anywhere from 24 hours to 36 hours to totally charge your vehicle. So it's a long time. And then we have level 2 charging. That's on a 208, 240 volt outlet. Think of that like your dryer. That takes 5 to 8 hours to completely charge your electric vehicle. So that's more similar to overnight charging. And then we also have level 3 charging, what we call direct current fast charging, or DC fast charging. That's at 480 volts. And that typically takes anywhere from 30 minutes to 1 hour to fully charge. So with these 3 levels, we often talk about this concept of charging where you park, so that the charging should be located and should be at the level that is necessary for where the vehicle is parked for many hours at a time. So you're parked at home for many hours at a time, or at work for many hours of time, and having charging most typically with level 2, since that takes 5 to 8 hours, that is the best overall experience for drivers. It's the least impact on the electricity grid, and it's typically cheaper as well. And so what we're seeing in practice is that about 80% of electric vehicle charging is happening where the vehicles are parked for many hours at a time. So not DC fast charging. But of course, for shorter dwell times, for road trips, absolutely. And then for folks that don't have charging at home, like people who live in multi-unit dwellings, fast charging is really essential. So we've built out a pretty substantial fast charging network. We call it supercharging network. We have 2,000 superchargers globally. We just hit 1,000 in the US this year. And in Nevada specifically, we have 21 fast charging stations, and we're going to need to double that before 2022. So a significant amount of increase in growth will have to happen to serve the amount of Tesla drivers we're anticipating in future years. One thing I wanted to make sure I noted is this exciting shift that's happening in the EV space, which you guys are probably observing on the ground in Nevada as well, where we're seeing the initial adopters of electric vehicles were typically single-family homeowners. They had the ability to purchase electric vehicles early on and charge their vehicles at home. And now we're seeing more and more drivers, they're mass market adopters. They live in multi-unit dwellings, they're apartment owners, they're renters, and they can't rely as easily on home charging. And so they're relying more and more on this fast charging network. And so as a charging provider and a vehicle company, we're being able to observe how vehicles are being purchased, who's purchasing them, and then also having to shift our charging to support these new drivers and these new use cases. So, Kirsty, to answer your question, a few things that, and I work extensively with states and cities and localities across North America on figuring out how to support transportation electrification. And there are 4 key things that I wanted to flag today that are extremely helpful, many of which cities and jurisdictions in Nevada are already doing. So one of them is just establishing firm targets for electric vehicles and electric vehicles charging stations and action plans to meet that. Second is developing streamlined permitting to accelerate building timelines. This can really make or break a project. I did want to give a shout out to jurisdictions in Nevada, Southern Nevada specifically, that have far faster permitting timelines than most states in the US. So thank you for all of your work there. The third being city-owned property. So figuring out if it's state property, county property, city property, figuring out if there are locations where the city can either build their own charging infrastructure or pair with third-party developers to build out that infrastructure network. As Tesla, we've built a lot of charging infrastructure with cities, both level 2 and DC fast charging. So that's absolutely something that needs to continue to grow. And then this piece, which I'll just touch on really quickly and perhaps dig into more later on the panel, is building codes. Not the sexiest topic, but really powerful if we do it right. And so one thing that we've seen across the nation is cities specifically, but also some states establish parking requirements for new buildings. So for a new building, new residential building, new commercial building, that their parking lots have a certain percentage of those parking stalls that are electric vehicle ready. So they have the panel capacity, they have the conduit, sometimes the wiring set up so you can easily drop in a charging station. And that's really what we need to be thinking about in scale so we reach the transportation electrification goals that we've set as a state and what we're seeing really in the market today.
Well, thank you for all that. Mike, would you like to weigh in too?
Yeah, I think Sam mentioned that their company's fully deployable under existing circumstances, and I think that's where Nuro is as well. I mean, we're not necessarily seeking changes in order to deploy. We can deploy our vehicles under existing circumstances, but there's certainly some nice things that could be added that could be helpful down the road. I think you've heard already about the curb flexibility. And I think, just where Nuro might be different in the autonomous delivery vehicles where we don't have occupants in our vehicles, that we're partnering with a retail entity. So it's a grocery store, it's a Domino's in a retail shopping center, and places like that where the employees are loading our vehicle at that site. And that's something I think is a little bit unique compared to some of the rideshare or passenger transportation in the AV sector. And just want to make sure that that's flagged as something that's unique in that delivery sector. In the delivery sector, where the staff are going to be, instead of having a delivery driver, you're not going to have someone that's a loader of the AV vehicle. And so, just thinking about that interaction where employees are going to be going to the curb, loading the vehicles and returning back into the store, and what that looks like today versus what are some innovative designs that could happen in retail centers that could allow for the loading and unloading of delivery vehicles. Is just another aspect I would add in on. And then on the charging infrastructure, our vehicles do not necessarily need to travel long distances. They're last mile delivery. So they're doing short trips from your local neighborhood stores. And what we're doing in Houston right now is in industrial sectors, we'll have a depot where we store our vehicles overnight. We'll charge them, and then the vehicles will then go to our partners for their use for the day, and then return back to the depot for charging. And so there is also the difference there, I think, in terms of some of the other electric vehicles and some of the passenger rideshare folks that might need more of that infrastructure for longer travel. And so just thinking that it's not necessarily a need for charging stations for the further deployment of it, that some of the other structures where there's depots or overnight charging and the bots can operate during the day and then be charged at night is another structure to be aware of.
Great. I'm thinking of, as I mentioned in the in the introductory remarks, the McKinsey research and some of the things that have been in the media recently, in terms of the earliest applications of adoption, kind of at scale, from each of your perspectives. And one of the things that I think about is there's been a lot of discussion around, electric tractor trailers or semi trucks, and then as you see that, there's also concerns about the size of the batteries and the weight, and how how far in the future we'll be before we'll have fully electric trucks on the road. And I use that as an example, just as a specific example. But from each of your perspective, kind of in the niches of the deployment that you're in, where do you see the rapid growth happening? Nolani, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, happy to. So one thing I'll note, and you flagged this earlier, Chris, was around Nevada's position on lithium-ion batteries. And I'll just flag, if folks weren't watching, Tesla's Q1 investor relations call happened earlier this week. Elon Musk did state that the energy storage challenge can be solved with lithium-ion batteries. And so we're investing heavily in this technology and really doubling supplier capacity over the next few years. So that's one piece of the technology question I think you asked, Chris, that we fully believe in, both on our standalone storage side as well as for electric vehicles. But for heavy duty electrification, that's a really exciting part of our company. Our Tesla's semi truck, it's aimed to hit the Class 8 market, Class 8 truck segment. And it's really one of the hardest and most important sectors to electrify from a emissions perspective. And we are seeing, I think it's happening now, like we are seeing medium and heavy duty vehicles start to hit the roads. We're seeing a ton of announcements, and they are going to be heavier because they have the significant battery that will need to support them. And so that's something that we've talked about a lot. They also will need sophisticated analysis about how different heavy duty fleets will need to be charged. And it really will be very dependent on the fleet needs. Some fleets that have time between different shifts, driver shifts, might be able to benefit lower power charging, as some fleets that, let's say, are only charging in one specific location and have an hour flip over between shifts will really need quite significant high power charging, far beyond what we're seeing on the market today for light duty vehicles. And our Class 8 semi truck will be capable of supporting about 500 miles of range. And we're excited that we're going to start seeing those deployments hit the road this year. So in a couple months' time, maybe I can come back or ping with Chris that we'll have some good announcements and actually information on charging and how those vehicles are being used on the road.
Great. And how about from your perspective, Mike?
Yeah, I think this question really goes to the heart of Neuro's strategy. And I think, one of the reasons that we decided to remove people from the equation and just focus on the delivery of goods is because we feel that that is likely to be accepted sooner. I think from the safety perspective, if you can transport a pizza then and prove that you can do that safely, then you can start transporting a person. And so I think if you look at our strategy as a company, we have said, well, look, how do we remove people from the equation? And what does that allow us to do? And I think in doing that, the deployment will come sooner for some of the delivery vehicles before you start having some of the passengers and broader scenarios where there are people involved. And I think, down the line, it's certainly our company's aspirations. We view ourselves as a robotics company, and we view our current R2 model, and we will have future R3s and R4s out there. But, certainly in the long run, we look to getting into different sectors in the autonomous vehicle space. But at Neuro, we're certainly big believers in that delivery first through deployment.
Great. And Samuel?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so the way that Motional thinks about it is, I guess we'll focus specifically here on the passenger transportation use case. So I think Mike, talked, really eloquently to like the passenger-less delivery side, and I think that I would not be surprised if we started seeing much more of Neuro's delivery vehicles on our roads, very soon. And I won't talk to the trucking and some of the electrification pieces, but purely when we're talking about moving people, it's useful to think about the difference between like a fleet operation of vehicles that are going to be on a network and can be accessed by really anyone, from like personally owned vehicles. Like I own an autonomous vehicle and it's sitting in my driveway. So the way Motional thinks about it is that there is going to be, you'll start seeing the fleet owned vehicles much sooner than the personally owned vehicles. So basically over the course of the 2020s, you'll start to see, as I mentioned earlier, you can already see some autonomous vehicles in Las Vegas, but more and more commercial deployments of fleets of autonomous vehicles on ride-hail networks, transporting individuals as well as with some shared use cases. And it's going to be something where it'll start in areas first that are lower speed and high densities of demand. So, more commercial areas. I think the Las Vegas Strip is a great example. There's tons of people moving between the different casinos and entertainment venues before moving further and further out into the suburbs, where there's going to be just lower levels of demand, but also the requirement for higher and higher speeds. So you start, very relatively consolidated areas and expanding out. And that'll be the general trend over the course of the 2020s of having more and more of these fleets of vehicles. And as that's happening, the cost of some of these autonomy systems and the sensors will start to really come down. And that will make some of the more personally owned vehicles more affordable, and that will start to occur in the 2030s and beyond. So really, it's the shared autonomous use case kind of for the very near future, until you're getting out into the 2030s and 40s, where it's going to be much more common for individuals to perhaps own their own autonomous vehicle. The last thing I'll say on that is just to kind of really put home some of the points I was making earlier. I think the the impact this is going to have, you're already starting to see it with other forms of shared and on-demand transportation, whether that's goods delivery or transportation of individuals, with how that is impacting our infrastructure and our roadways, with people lining up and parking in places maybe they shouldn't because they're going in for some takeout food, or a driver is waiting for food to be prepared so they can take it to someone that has ordered it, or a bunch of people trying to get in and out of a concert venue. So the type of rollout we're foreseeing is not one where it's like you wake up one day and all of a sudden the roads are completely different and every vehicle is an autonomous one. It's much more of a gradual transition, and one that we've already started.
That's great. And so before I move to the next question, I want to see if there's any questions from the working group members. Any thoughts?
Hey, this is Jim Chrisley at the airport. How you doing today, Chris?
Good. How are you?
Great. Yeah, this was a great conversation so far. I just wanted to share some of our thoughts and challenges, because every one of these modes of transportation or charging is going to end up at the airport, right? Either someone's going to drive a battery powered car, or if it's Lyft and it's driverless, they're going to want to come to the airport. We've had some discussions, I know we had, with Aptiv and now Motional over the past couple of years, and actually got to ride in a driverless Lyft up and down the strip. It was quite interesting, but yeah, it is challenging. And as you said, the challenge is I'm going to use that term, the PUDO, right, with the ride share. It's the trick of getting Lyft and Uber integrated was the fact you have to match a passenger with a specific car, and that's where the real challenge. And then when it became so popular, I mean, we have grown our pickup and staging areas multiple times, relocated them, for anywhere from clogging our roadway system to clogging our elevators in the garage. It was one challenge after another, and luckily, I don't want to say luckily, but the pandemic has given us reason to pause. And now with the driver shortage of both rideshare platforms, it's given us a reason to pause. But at the height of 2019 or end of 2019, when we hit our record 51.5 million, I think we had it pretty dialed in with both Lyft and Uber on getting it on the single floor, no elevators, no pedestrians crossing traffic, and staging area off our road. So, but anyway, the same challenge, and like I said, the challenge with that was the matching of the passenger with the car, where I would hope in an autonomous scenario, it wouldn't matter, maybe the passenger would pick the type of car, and it wouldn't matter which car, and it'd be more of the queue, right? They stand in line, they get to the front, and the car takes them where they want to go, and they don't care if it's the red Nissan Altima with plates from here. It's more of a queue system. So saying that, I would hope that'd be the way that this would end up. And secondly, on the battery side, right, we are, we're getting more and more requests from our customers for charging, right? And it's a challenge. What level of charge do we provide? As you can imagine, our airport's old, our infrastructure is old, and finding additional electrical capacity to handle, these to produce or to provide this type of services is going to be a challenge for us over the coming years. And initially, the worry would be you'd put a charger in, and then someone parks on it for a week because they're gone to see grandma for a week. We don't want that. So our initial thoughts here over the past few months, as we've had a chance to think, is maybe it's where would someone have their keys so you could charge it and move it. So we're thinking we probably deploy it in a valet scenario where they would be able to relocate that car and put the right, as this becomes more and more popular. So the option would be, if you're going to drive an electric car to the airport and you want it charged, well, you're going to have to park in valet. And then long term, as this rolls out even further, maybe we do deploy it in some of our long term. We put some level 1 in our long term parking, or maybe some of the level 2 or 3 in our short term style parking. But anyway, this is all really near and dear to our heart here, and we're thinking about everything. And even long term, as we look to develop our new airport 30 miles to the south, this is going to have to be a part of that development strategy on how we can accommodate. We have an awesome opportunity with a new airport, potentially a transportation utility corridor that's a half-mile wide that can be used to develop what we need to get access, and from a delivery perspective and interconnectivity between the two airports. I mean, it screams this is everything it's about, is autonomous, easy, fast, etc. So appreciate the conversation so far, Chris, and thanks for, I probably said too much, but thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the perspective. Panelists like to respond. Oh, Bill, I see you've got a
Chris, thank you. Bill Arndt, City of Las Vegas. Thank you all who spoke on the panel. Two questions. One is what should be the balance of public charging stations versus private charging stations as we work regionally to make sure we have the right infrastructure in place? And then a question specifically for Nolani. I really like the building code idea. Is there a suggestion on a model building code approach that you have as we work across all our jurisdictions to make sure that we're forward thinking and integrating some of the electrification issues into our building codes?
Yeah, I think both of those questions might have been targeted to me, and great questions. On the breakdown of public versus private charging stations, the actual wording is interesting because it depends on the locality and the state of what public actually means. So in most states, Tesla's fast charging or supercharger network is considered public since it is available to the public. It isn't restricted to, let's say, a workplace or a specific multi-unit dwelling, but it does serve only Tesla vehicles at this point. And so I think to your question, it would fall into that broader umbrella category of private. I don't think there necessarily is a number or a percentage or a breakdown that works best for specific jurisdictions. We need more charging infrastructure and we needed it yesterday. And so everything is important. And what we talk about a lot is that the way in which we do this, and Nevada is actually a great state for this, is ensuring that the incentives and the rebates and the policies and programs are technologically neutral, are flexible, and allow, for example, on the building code side, allow jurisdictions and buildings to determine what type of infrastructure best fits the needs of their customers. So in the second part of your question on building codes, absolutely, there is model code language. And in fact, your very own Clark County commissioners voted fairly recently for staff to think through model code language on building codes and bring that back. And that's a huge deal. Lots of cities across the US have already passed EV-ready building codes, Atlanta and Chicago, and Miami and many others. And so given how important Southern Nevada is for electric vehicles and for Tesla specifically, building codes needs to be something that is on the table. And it really is low-hanging fruit. And it's something that we're happy to support jurisdictions on.
I see David Botchian had a comment in the chat. David, did you want to share that?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Just wanted to signal to folks that the Governor's Office of Energy is responsible for adopting versions of the International Energy Conservation Code for the state, independent of what local jurisdictions do and choose to do. But nonetheless, we're exploring adding some EV-ready components to this next version of the code as a way to send a signal of the importance of such codes to the local jurisdictions as they're also considering these.
Great. Do we have any other comments or questions from the working group members? Kristen.
Yeah, so Kristen Averett, I really appreciate the discussion as well. I thought it was really interesting. But just one thing that I always think about when we're talking about kind of the AV, EV enterprise, it seems like we're so focused on personal vehicles. And in terms of the design of where we put infrastructure, where we make those investments, just the considerations around mass transit. I think everybody's hopefully aware of our statewide emissions reduction targets for greenhouse gases. And that really requires a transformation in terms of how we design our transportation infrastructure. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about this holistically. And I don't know if there's any comments about that from the folks on the panel.
Hi, Kristen. Yeah, it's an absolutely great point. And I think, many of us who are even tangentially involved in transportation policy have probably seen the famous photo of how many individuals you can fit on a street if they're in personally owned vehicles, buses, and it's like more people, and then, mass transit, and it's even more people. I think it was NACTO had an interesting like take on that, where they showed that same image, and then they showed how many people could fit in personally owned autonomous vehicles, and it was the same as the personally owned conventional vehicles. They're not any more space efficient. And so at least when it comes to our conversation here and infrastructure, the way Emotional has been thinking about it is really in terms of that first and last mile connectivity. There's really going to be places where it's just not efficient to run buses and higher occupancy vehicles at any sort of frequency to make them useful to the individuals that are there. Sure, there is going to be people that are going to take an on-demand ride-hail vehicle in a absurdly short distance, but I think what we would love to see in terms of infrastructure is more integration from like an infrastructure perspective between like the funneling of people from autonomous vehicles and kind of lower occupancy vehicles to a place where they can then transfer to a higher form vehicle. Whether that is more flexible curb space near a popular bus stop or mass transit station or something along those lines. So really it makes it as seamless as possible. I mean, I think there's transportation policy research going back decades that just shows that if you can make that transfer as fluid as possible from a experience perspective and even a payment perspective, you're much more likely to get people to use mass transit or public transit. It really just needs to be as easy as possible. So if they're a mile and a half, even a half a mile away from a bus stop, then we need to find a way to get them to that bus stop so they can efficiently get to other locations through public transportation.
And I would just add in also that, in the delivery sector here, we don't necessarily view ourselves as taking people out of buses. It's mostly the trips that we would be replacing would be more, hey, mother is at home with her kids and has to go pick up something for dinner. And that errand to the store in the minivan that's not electric would then be replaced with our vehicle that's electric. And so you're reducing emissions because you're using the electric vehicle instead of the traditional combustion engine. But then you're also not necessarily competing with the mass transit sector there in replacing this. So it's in a way, just that delivery sector is not necessarily, in contrast to what's happening in that mass transit sector.
Hey, Chris, this is Terry. I have a question. So just kind of playing catch up on charging stations and whatnot. Is there financial and or cost sharing assistance to allow for the charging stations? So for instance, in North Las Vegas, if there's city owned land where maybe a charging station would want to be installed, whose at whose cost? Is the city putting that in, or is that something, so maybe Noelani, is that something that Tesla participates in? Just trying to get a handle on how things are developed.
Chris, I can offer an answer.
Oh, go ahead.
Please.
So yeah, and Noelani, sorry, not speaking for Tesla, obviously, but on the non-Tesla side, NV Energy does have an incentive program for governmental charging, and Jennifer Taylor on this call can connect with you offline to kind of give you the details about incentive eligibility and the program designed to assist with that.
Perfect. And our public works may be all over this. So I just wanted to ask the question.
We want so many people to take advantage of it. So would love to loop you in.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Terry, Jeff Bridger here. We'll get you all that information on the incentive programs.
Thanks,
Sorry, Jeff. And Terry, just so you know, check in with Val Evans because I've already connected with her on the program.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Smarter people than I are already on it.
So it looks like we've got time for one more question. Any other?
And Chris, just to respond to Terry's question from the third-party developer perspective, it really depends what the city is looking for. If they're looking for level 2 charging or fast charging, how much of it. The properties that we have worked with cities and states on, it really depends the structure that we negotiate with the city. But most of the time, all of the time actually, Tesla is paying for the build out of that infrastructure. We're paying for the operations and maintenance. We're doing all of the billing. And so there's nothing that the city needs to do to ensure that both the charging stations are located there and then also the ongoing maintenance of the station. Different companies have different models. Some companies will just sell you the equipment, sell the city the equipment, and the city then has to do the operations and maintenance and billing. And sometimes there's some business models that are in between. So it depends on what the city really needs. And as the Energy Office said, unlike a lot of states, Nevada has a very EV-friendly utility. And so you have some great programs that you can leverage.
Very cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So it looks like we're at time for our panel discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists and for participating today and also for being here in Nevada. So thank you. And now we'll move on to item number 6, project update from Nevada Energy regarding GreenLink. And we have Jeff Brigger, Director of Business Development at Nevada Energy.
Hey, thank you, Chris. I'm going to share my 525 PowerPoint slides right now for everybody. Just kidding. I'm just going to do one slide and then kind of talk through where we're at on the project, if that's okay with everybody. Thought I'd break it up into really a quick overview of the project. I saw that there's a lot of folks on this group that's probably already seen this presentation numerous times, so we'll go pretty high level through it and kind of give you a quick overview, some of the benefits of it, and then an update on where we're at with GreenLink Nevada. So this is a pretty big project for us. We certainly think, you know, after listening to this panel discussion, and the electrification efforts that are happening in the state, I think this is going to be super important to helping us achieve our goals in the state and really making Nevada a great leader in the clean energy economy. So right now, if you look at that map, we've got, there's kind of three segments, but for the sake of this group, the GreenLink West segment is probably most relevant for Southern Nevada. But that will be a 525 kV line, big transmission line that will span approximately 350 miles between Yerington, Nevada and Las Vegas, Nevada. The other two sections of that will be GreenLink North, which is a 525 line that'll go from Yerington to Ely. And then there's a small section that comes out of Yerington that will serve some growing load pockets in the Northern Nevada market. So as you can see, this new project here will essentially provide a transmission loop through the state, and there's a whole lot of benefits that come along with that infrastructure. More importantly, the environmental benefits of this project are essential for us to help Nevada reach its climate action and decarbonization goals, and our increased renewable portfolio standard. The GreenLink Nevada will allow the state to tap into some resource-rich renewable energy zones along those lines that really had limited access before this line will be built. And then the initiative will also provide access to and allow for development of the ability to really import and export renewable resources into the Western region. GreenLink Nevada supports our economic recovery, right? This is a pretty big project. It generates about $690 million in economic activity and nearly 4,000 jobs. This implemented infrastructure enhancements will allow NV Energy to meet future customer energy demands. So as we just heard from our panel, there's a lot of electrification efforts that are happening throughout the state. There's also some large customers and projects that are in the state that have ever increasing sustainability goals, and this allows us to be able to supply them with low cost renewable energy resources and in many cases low carbon resources. And that'll help us to continue our diversification efforts throughout the state. The other big benefit of this project is it's going to improve reliability and transfer capacity. So As you can see on the map, before we had the online that went from Las Vegas to Ely, this will give us the loop and give us that we won't risk an outage basically of one source going north and south. So another big benefit to the project. The state's going to receive benefits from this immediately, right? We will start hiring folks to work through permitting and routing of the project, and all of those benefits will happen today, and they're deferring costs later on as the project gets built over about a 10-year lifespan. So that's some of the very high level benefits. There's certainly a lot more, and we'd be happy to answer questions, but I wanted to kind of give you a quick update of where we're at with the project. So the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada has approved moving forward with this project. We will begin preliminary design and permitting on both segments of both Greenlink West and Greenlink North. And then upon completion of that work, the construction will start on Greenlink West, which, as I told you, that's the line, 350-mile line between Yerington and Las Vegas. We expect that line to be completed by 2026. And hopefully, we're estimating after completion of the NEPA process that we will start construction on it roughly 2024. So great new project for the state. Allow a lot of folks good skilled jobs that'll be created as we start working through construction of this. And then I think the big part of the ability to develop additional resources, renewable resources throughout the state, will help serve the state well and help us diversify our economy. And that is all I got on Greenlink Nevada updates, and be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the working group members? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 7, and that is our RCG economics update. John Restrepo.
Thank you, Chris. Because of time constraints, you want me to go through the slideshow you asked me to prepare? Should I just give you the highlights real quick on what's happened in the last couple of meetings?
You know, let's do highlights, and that way we've got time for some questions.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. As you know, we've had 2 meetings thus far that we've, this will be the third one on February 25th and on March 18th. On the meeting of the 25th, we had 3 speakers. We had Norm Anderson, Chairman and CEO of CGLA Infrastructure. We had Roland Stevens from SRI, and then we at RCG did a presentation on the state of the land markets here in Southern Nevada and the question of availability of developable land. Norm touched on the issues of the growth of the 5G technology and digitalization. He also spent some time talking about the 4th industrial revolution, which is the age of AI, automation, and robotics, and talk about how that is obviously the pandemic accelerated that. The question that we have here in Southern Nevada, particularly not as much in Northern Nevada, is the jobs that appear they're going to be replaced and may have a difficulty coming back. And this was kind of supported yesterday by Chairman Jerome Powell, speaking for the Fed, are low-skilled, low-wage workers in the service industries. And so that's where the lag is in terms of the economic recovery, and may have a long-term effect on how we recover in terms of our job market, in terms of how quickly we move into this new 4th industrial revolution. The other thing he mentioned, which I thought was interesting, is that in 1980, 80% of all infrastructure projects were built by the feds. Last year, it was about 30%. And in terms of funding. So funding is being shifted to the states. And now we have obviously the growth of public-private partnerships and the evolution of the state infrastructure banks are part of this whole discussion. And that was kind of his focus yesterday. And he said, in February, I'm sorry, the other thing he mentioned is that we need to look at what's going on in Europe and in China, particularly China with the Belt Network, a road network, to see where other countries are heading in terms of looking at things in a different way than we traditionally do here in the U.S. in terms of infrastructure investments. Roland Stevens from SRI talked a lot about the new strategy, economic development and target industry strategy the state is beginning to employ. He looked at some work from Brookings and talked about Southern Nevada being part of an economic Southwest triangle that includes LA and Phoenix. So we need to look at economic connectivity as opposed to just geographic, for lack of a better term, artificial geographic boundaries and how the economy is going to work. Roland also speaks quite a bit about the issue of electrification and how that's a major part of the future, particularly with the Biden stimulus package that's being discussed in Congress right now. Issues of green technology, the role of Nevada in the green energy economy, and Nevada's both Southern and Northern Nevada, its role in the logistics industry, and because of changes in the supply chain between onshoring and nearshoring of jobs, and trying to lower the disruptions as we saw this past year in the pandemic with the goods coming in from overseas, particularly with the shortage of port capacity, containers, and all these other things. So what is Nevada's role in that? What are the investments that we have to make in our infrastructure, particularly our road networks and our rail? And I'll get into the rail a little bit more in terms of playing in this new world of logistics and supply chain changes. We talked about the kind of more ubiquitous thing, and that is land availability. We were commissioned recently this past year, as you guys know, to do a study to look at what is the issue of land supply in Southern Nevada, particularly in the Las Vegas Valley, of certain types of land, certain types of parcels of a certain size with a certain slope that have access to rail and or roads. And we were not surprised, but it was still a little bit shocking to see that we're short approximately 5,000 acres to accommodate the job forecasts that are being done for Clark County. We just don't have enough land to accommodate what we call employment land uses when we match it up against what is needed for housing to make sure we try and we gain some housing affordability, because that also comes into play in terms of attracting companies into the region. It's the cost of housing. So the issue of land shortages is a critical thing that we're thinking about. So it's pleasantly surprised to hear the folks from McCarran talk today about the airport moving forward. The Ivanpah Airport, which brings with it about 17,000 additional acres that are targeted for let's call them employment land uses, whatever that may be, and including an infrastructure corridor. This also ties into the Catherine Cortez's economic development lands bill. We call it the Southern Nevada Lands Bill, Economic Development Conservation Act, that's in Congress right now. That frees up a couple of million acres, for example, for protection, not free up, but continue protecting environmentally sensitive lands. But it'll also bring around 42,000 acres by expanding the boundary around the valley, the disposal boundary, particularly in the southern part of the county on the way to LA, with additional acreage up to 40, let's say 30 to 40,000 acres to help accommodate future growth in more of a balanced way. We need this land to achieve all the goals that we're trying to achieve here in terms of diversifying our economy, moving forward to make it more resilient and sustainable. A key component to this, and often not thought about in a lot of discussions, is do we have the land to accommodate the growth that we want to do to our target industries? Heading into meeting number 2 on March 18th, Chris talked about issues of inland ports. He led it up, the growth of e-commerce. He mentioned, Chris Sanchez did that a McKinsey study recently came out and said that 10 years of e-commerce, the prior 10 years was done in terms of e-commerce activity in the U.S. was done in 1 year in 2020 because of the pandemic. And so the issue of e-commerce is here with us. It is going to play a major role both in the electric vehicle, semi-autonomous vehicle world, as well as the types of jobs that we're going to need to create to live in that economy. And the question now becomes, are inland ports or multimodal facilities the future, or at least one, for example, in Southern Nevada and Northern Nevada, and will we have the rail and road capacity to accommodate it? Back in 2015, we did a study for GOED on inland ports, and at that time, the railroads were not particularly enthusiastic about stopping either in Reno or Southern Nevada. Now, whether that has changed, and we think it is changing because of changing the structure of the supply chains from overseas into the U.S. That's come into play again. So the question of what do we need to do to improve connectivity between Southern California, for example, on the I-15. It's important to do the I-11, don't get me wrong, but right now, for the next 10 years, the most critical thing is improving the connectivity and the supply chains between us and the ports of LA and Long Beach, and in the north between Reno and Port of Oakland, as well as the ports in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. So that whole issue of being tied into the 5th largest economy in the world is a pretty critical thing. Michael Brown in that meeting talked about what's our competitive positioning, both in Southern Nevada and in Reno, against our competing cities. We can generally stipulate that we're always going to be, well, for the most part, more competitive than metros in California. The bigger question is, how do we remain competitive or gain increased competitiveness when we look at Salt Lake, when we look at Denver, when we look at Phoenix, and some of these other, and Austin, Texas, for that matter, all these cities that are gaining economic activity and jobs from California. And where do we stand? What do we need to do to improve our competitiveness? Whether it's a land issue I talked about earlier, the quality of the workforce, the quality of higher ed, all these sorts of things come into play. Mike talked about that a lot. Kind of rounding things out, Michael Sussman of Strategic Rail Finance talked about what do we need to do to invest in our rail system in Southern Nevada. Right now, we don't have very good rail connectivity to Southern California. 70% of all the goods movement into the state is on truck, not by rail. So what do we need to do to make investments in our rail infrastructure, not only between us and the West Coast ports, but also between Reno and Southern Nevada, and where those roads are going to be electrified vehicles, where that's heading. So the whole issue of giving a more complete multimodal experience, if you want to call it that, for goods movement and people movement is going to be critical. And finally, two more actually. Chris Gutierrez of the KC Smartport, pretty active, basically multimodal facility there. You can call them, I guess, an inland port. I talked about how they're moving in a very strong way toward automation, AI, and robotics at that port. But and with the added adage, it is in the short term to medium term, going to cause disruptions in jobs, in the types of occupations, and how do we retrain those folks to work with the automation and the AI and the robotics, and what occupations will no longer be here. But that's the wave of the future, and the pandemic just accelerated that trend. And finally, Pierce Homer talked about the whole issue, finally, again, sort of inland ports. He talked about the issues of freight complexes and understanding how freight complexes or intermodal facilities work, and whether they're seaport to seaport, seaport to inland port back to seaport, and then the whole issue of last mile delivery and what's the role we're going to play, particularly since we're located, fortunately for us, here in Nevada, next to the 5th largest economy in the world, as I mentioned earlier, and what do we need to do to stay competitive in that environment, and where do we need to go from here? And Chris, that kind of wraps it up. In more detailed comments or in the slide slot provided, Steve, that you can look at more of the detailed bullets in there. And that's my presentation today, Chris.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. We'll make sure those slides are on the website for review for everybody. And I wanted to see if there was perhaps any thoughts from the working group or any comments based on where we're at this far with the discussion.
This is Bart. Quick comment, John. I just haven't seen the analysis, but I know it must exist between the different regional sectors. Like I heard you mention Reno a couple of times, and this isn't a political statement. It's just I don't know what the economic interplay is between Reno and Las Vegas versus, say, Salt Lake or Phoenix or LA. I assume LA is the strongest economic region partner that we have, but I don't know it. Could you just comment a little bit on that so we have a better idea of the kind of priorities and focal point?
Yeah, thank you, Bart. That's a great question. Yeah, clearly Southern California, with its 30, let's say, million people, 25 to 30 million people, is a key driver of the economy of Southern Nevada. We're essentially, let's call it a business suburb of LA. The advantage, that's a big advantage to us. The challenge, though, is the I-15 connectivity. It still needs to be enhanced some more, and there's something that we can't do anything about. It's just a fact of life. That is the I-15 corridor and the way it moves from Southern California up toward the north, toward, let's say, the I-80 corridor. is not as strong as the logistics corridor, because the way it goes, then the I-80 corridor that takes you all the way from the Port of Oakland all the way almost to the East Coast. And so there's just so much we can do. That doesn't mean we shouldn't invest in the I-15 corridor. If we have to, even in California, Nevada needs to invest there because that connectivity is really important. And so Reno's got some geographic locational advantages, Reno Sparks, that we do not have here. That's why their economy is more diverse now and why their unemployment rate is so much lower and why that corridor does as well as it does in terms of east-west connectivity. The other thing that's coming into play here is what's going to happen over time to West Coast ports as they stay so crowded. And we see ships, assuming to the extent we're still going to get a lot of freight from China, bypassing West Coast ports, going through the Panama Canal and hitting our Gulf Coast ports, East Coast ports. And what does that do to changing the logistics of us? Well, the best that we can do is focus on our connectivity to companies in Southern California to have them more seriously look at Southern, and they are coming in, and the LVGA has done a great job, and so is GO. How do we increase that connectivity, not only physical connectivity, but economic connectivity, as Brookings talked about in terms of that structure, that geographic triangle between us, Phoenix, and LA. Did that answer your question, Bart? Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, John. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Moving on to item number 8, working group member comments. Any general comments from the group? Seeing none, we're moving on to item number 9, introduction of agenda items scheduled for the May meeting. So in the May meeting, one of the things that, in terms of us kind of rounding out, as John provided that great summary of where we're at in our discussions, one of the things that we see as a next opportunity for discussion is infrastructure financing. Talking about this state infrastructure bank and the proposal that the governor has going through the legislative session, as well as the president discussed last night, the funding the proposal that the administration has for infrastructure development and job growth. And of course, that's going to be predicated on what Congress comes up with. But nonetheless, we think that diving into the infrastructure finance piece would be advantageous for the group, and also looking at different models. I think one that comes to mind is Australia, and how they've adopted kind of some unique ways of funding infrastructure by engaging with private sector dollars. So we'll be working on putting together a panel of a panel that was similar in scope and how we set it up today for that meeting next month. So stay tuned on that, and certainly if there's any request for specific topics, please would like to hear from you now. That'd be great. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Hey, Chris, Jim Chrisley at the McCarran Airport again. Yeah, I think maybe not for May, but maybe June. I think I'd love to be able to give a briefing to the group on the Southern Nevada Supplemental Airport and where we're at and sort of our strategy moving forward. I think that might be a great follow-on to the financing piece, because that's certainly going to be a challenge and for us to get this thing built. So if that sounds good, you could pencil us in for June.
Absolutely, sounds great. I appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you.
Was there any other thoughts?
Hey, Chris, this is Dave Swallow with the RTC. If we could, speaking of James Chrisley's presentation, could we talk about transportation between the supplemental airport and the metro area? Because I think that's integral to everything we're talking about as far as this working group.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll make sure that we agendize those for our June meeting. I'm just taking notes here. Okay, great. Okay. So seeing no other comment on item 9, we'll be moving on to number 10, public comment. Jeanette.
Hi, everyone. It's Jeanette Nolan for the record. Does anyone wish to give public comment at this time? Please state your name clearly and you'll have 3 minutes.
Please.
Oh, I think I heard someone. Was that Mr. Evans?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, Ken Evans, EVANS for the record. President, Urban Chamber of Commerce. Just wanted to say thank you. Today's meeting had a great, insightful discussion. Definitely some things that we'll want to make sure the small, diverse businesses we represent are aware of. Definitely some things being discussed now that will impact our entrepreneurs as well as people interested in employment for decades to come. So thank you for the ability to participate, observe, listen, and digest what was discussed today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Evans. I've noted that for the record. Does anyone else wish to give a comment at this time? Okay, hearing none. Chris, no further public comment at this time.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. Okay, moving on to item number 11, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn. This is Bill Arndt.
Thanks, Bill. Do we have a second on the motion?
I'll second. David Swallow, second.
David, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. I don't know that we have any opposed. All right, great. Well, thank you, guys. It was good to see everybody again. I really appreciate it. Great discussion today, and we'll be in touch with everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.